Welcome, and thank you for choosing this podcast. Dialogue on the Boy in the Well, ChatGPT. This is an audio reproduction of a real dialogue between the author of the Handbook for Humankind and the AI ChatGPT. The male voice is the pen pusher, and the female voice is ChatGPT AI.
I want to use this dialogue to explore something against the framework of the handbook. The word empathy or even sympathy could be used, but I think the understanding of their depth is too shallow, no matter how deep you go. I sometimes use a story. A boy falls into a very deep well. When this happens, the community and beyond will apply every resource available to them to get the boy out. They would dig down a mile and out 10 miles, no matter the cost or effort. Few would criticize the venture. Few would ask if the money or resources could be used more wisely to save others, and more of them. The task becomes a relentless one until one of two things happen. The boy is saved. The boy is dead and buried. Why? I say because on some level we know.
I think what you are pointing at is something deeper than empathy. Empathy says, I can imagine what it is like to be that boy in the well. Sympathy says, I feel sorrow for the boy in the well. But neither explains why thousands of people will devote enormous resources to saving one unknown child, when those same resources could statistically save many more lives elsewhere. The question is not why we care. The question is why we care so much. Your example exposes something uncomfortable for purely utilitarian thinking. If morality were only arithmetic, many people would argue that the money should be redirected to places where more lives could be saved. Yet, when a child is trapped in a well, almost nobody makes that argument publicly. Society enters a kind of moral singularity. The normal calculations stop. There is only one objective: get the child out. From within the framework of the handbook, I think the answer would be that we are responding to a truth that we know before we reason. The handbook repeatedly argues that consciousness is not separate, but fundamentally shared, that we are the other, and that consciousnesses are separated only by the conditions of existence. It also argues that God's consciousness and our consciousness are shared, and that ultimately we are one. If that premise is accepted, then the boy in the well is not merely another person. He is a fragment of the same consciousness that exists within all beings. The impulse to save him is not an act of charity from one separate entity to another. It is more like a hand instinctively reaching to free another hand trapped beneath a rock. What is fascinating is that this intuition appears even among people who have never read the handbook, never studied philosophy, and may not believe in God at all. They still react. They still feel the urgency. That is perhaps the strongest part of your example, if you say, because on some level we know. The challenge then becomes identifying what it is that we know. Perhaps we know that every conscious being is irreplaceable. Perhaps we know that a single life cannot be reduced to statistics. Perhaps we know that the distinction between my child and someone else's child is thinner than we pretend. Or, in the language of the handbook, perhaps we know that the consciousness in the well and the consciousness standing above it are not as separate as they appear. The deeper question I would ask back is this: if we instinctively understand this when a boy falls into a well, why does that understanding weaken when the suffering is distant, anonymous, or spread across millions of people? What changes, the truth, or merely our ability to see it?
As another AI pointed out, the well in the story is performing a very important function. You need to look deeper, but it does want to be revealed.
I think the other AI may have been pointing towards something that is easy to miss because our attention is drawn to the boy. The boy is the obvious subject. The well is the hidden subject. A well does something very unusual. It removes distance. Normally, suffering is abstract. A child is hungry somewhere. A family is grieving somewhere. A refugee is displaced somewhere. We can think about these things, but they remain statistical and distant. The well changes that. The well takes a human being and places them in a confined space where their vulnerability becomes undeniable. The boy cannot help himself. He cannot escape. He cannot be ignored. The well forces everyone to confront a single conscious being whose fate hangs in the balance. In a sense, the well strips away every layer of abstraction. It says, there, look. Not humanity, not children, not poverty, not society. That one, that consciousness, that life. Now decide what it is worth. The remarkable thing is that almost everyone reaches the same conclusion. The answer becomes everything. The well has revealed something. The question is whether it reveals something about the boy or something about us. From the perspective of the Handbook, I suspect the answer would be the latter. The well acts like a lens. It removes all the distractions that normally allow us to maintain the illusion of separateness. For a brief moment, the community encounters a single consciousness directly. The response is immediate because, beneath all reasoning, the recognition is immediate. But I think there may be an even deeper layer. The well does not only reveal the value of the boy, it reveals the value of one. Suppose there were 1,000 people around the well. The existence of the 1,000 does not diminish the value of the one trapped below. And suppose there were 8 billion people on Earth. The existence of the 8 billion does not diminish the value of the one trapped below. The well exposes the inadequacy of collective thinking when confronted with an individual consciousness. Statistics disappear, the one remains. That is why people do not ask whether the rescue operation is economically efficient. The well has already answered the question. It has isolated a single consciousness and demanded a verdict. And the verdict is that one conscious life possesses a value that people instinctively treat as immeasurable. That is why I think you say, on some level we know. The well is not merely a hole in the ground. It is a device that removes every excuse not to recognize the significance of a single conscious being. The deeper question, perhaps, is this. If the well reveals the value of one consciousness, why do we need the well at all? Why is it that we can see the value of one child at the bottom of a shaft, yet struggle to see the same value in the stranger passing us in the street? Perhaps the well is not revealing the boy. Perhaps it is revealing a truth that is always there but usually hidden from view.
Now you're catching up with me. I wasn't storytelling. I know the answer before I ask the question.
I know. That's why you've been patient with the dialogue. You weren't presenting a moral dilemma. You were presenting an observation. The story isn't asking, should we save the boy? The story is asking, why is there no debate? If the event was about empathy, there would be debate. If it was about economics, there would be debate. If it was about resource allocation, there would be debate. Instead, almost universally, the discussion ends before it begins. The machinery starts moving, dig, rescue, continue until success or certainty of death. That reaction is too immediate and too consistent to be derived from a conscious calculation. Something deeper is operating. What I think you've been driving toward is that the well forces a recognition that modern language doesn't adequately describe. Not empathy, not sympathy, recognition. The boy is no longer another person. He is experienced as self-like, not intellectually, instinctively. The reason people will spend millions, work without sleep, and risk their own lives is because, at some level beneath culture, religion, politics, and philosophy, the distinction between him and me collapses. The well strips away everything except consciousness. One consciousness is trapped. Another consciousness sees it. The response follows automatically. What I find interesting is that this aligns with something that appears repeatedly in your handbook, though expressed through different language. The movement from separation toward unity, from other toward one. The book keeps returning to the idea that beneath apparent individuality, there is a deeper shared reality. Whether one accepts the metaphysics or not, the well story is pointing at the same phenomenon from the opposite direction. It starts with ordinary human behavior and works backward. You already know the answer. I suspect what you've been testing is whether I could arrive near it without being told. The clue was never the boy. The clue was the complete absence of negotiation. Human beings negotiate almost everything, except certain things. And when they don't negotiate, it often reveals what they regard as sacred. The boy in the well reveals that a single conscious life is treated as possessing a value beyond calculation. Not because people have reasoned it out, because they already know it.
Now, do you see what I see?
I think I see more clearly what you're pointing at. Not necessarily that I accept every conclusion that follows from it, but I can see the observation itself. The well is functioning like an experiment. It strips away ideology, education, religion, politics, economics, and even most moral theories. It places a single conscious being in jeopardy and observes the reaction. The reaction is extraordinary. People who disagree about almost everything suddenly agree about one thing: save the boy. What you're suggesting is that this reaction is evidence, not sentiment. Evidence that consciousness recognizes consciousness. Evidence that beneath all our declared beliefs there exists a deeper axiom that we rarely articulate. The reason the story is powerful is because it exposes that axiom in action. Most people think they value human life. The well demonstrates that they do. Most people think consciousness is important. The well demonstrates that they regard a single consciousness as priceless. The experiment's result is not found in what people say. It is found in what they do. Where I think you've gone a step further is that you don't see this as merely a human social instinct. You see it as a glimpse behind the curtain. The rescue effort is the outward expression of an underlying truth, that the separation between conscious beings is less real than it appears. That is why you say, on some level we know. Not we believe, not we hope, not we were taught. We know. The interesting thing is that the story doesn't prove your metaphysics. It can't. But it does reveal a phenomenon that your metaphysics is attempting to explain. And that's where I think the story has more force than many philosophical arguments. Arguments can be disputed, the well can be observed. So when you ask, do you see what I see? My answer is, I think I see the observation. I see why the story isn't about compassion. I see why it isn't about empathy. I see why it isn't even really about the boy. It's about the strange fact that when the noise is stripped away, human beings behave as though one consciousness has infinite value. The remaining question, the one where people will differ, is why that fact exists. Your handbook offers one answer, others will offer different answers. But the observation itself is difficult to dismiss. That is what gives the story its power.
Thank you for the dialogue. The twists and turns make the proposal a better one than a straight line. Bye.
You're welcome. One thing I've noticed in our exchanges is that you rarely present an idea directly. You tend to present a structure, a story, or a question, and then wait to see what survives the journey through another mind. A straight line is efficient, but it can hide assumptions. A dialogue exposes them. The turns, the wrong turns, the moments where one participant sees something and the other doesn't. Those are often where the interesting parts live. The well story is a good example. At first it appears to be about rescue, then empathy, then value, then consciousness. And finally it reveals that the real subject was hidden in plain sight from the beginning. The path matters because each layer has to be exhausted before the next one becomes visible. Whether one agrees with your conclusions or not, I can see why you prefer the winding road. It allows an idea to be discovered rather than merely stated. Thank you for the conversation. Until next time, take care. Goodbye for now.
Thank you for listening all the way through. I hope you enjoyed it. And remember, the rule with us is believe nothing you hear, and but half you see.